Eurozone industrial output rises by 0.3%. EU Commission will vote to impose new sanctions on Israel. And IEA warns against decline in output from mature oil and gas. Welcome to the Economic Bulletin with me, Halal Hamalawi, and we start off with Eurostat, which has reported that Eurozone industrial production inched higher in July, confirming views that the sector is holding up despite trade tensions, even if its rate of expansion is anemic. Industrial output in the 20 nations sharing the euro rose by 0.3% on the month, but compared to a year earlier, output was up 1.8%. Eurostat attributed the monthly increase to a 1.5% expansion in Germany, but France and Spain both reported monthly declines. Additionally, capital, durable and non-durable goods production all expanded by more than 1% on the month across the Eurozone, but energy production, a volatile component, was down 2.9%. European Commission spokesman Paula Pinho has announced that EU commissioners will vote to impose new sanctions on Israel due to the war in Gaza.
Demain, en réunion du Collège, les commissaires adopteront un paquet de mesures concernant Israël, notamment une proposition de la Commission visant à suspendre certaines dispositions commerciales de l'accord euro-méditerranéen entre l'Union européenne et Israël. It will include also those which will require an endorsement by the Council. So these are the measures announced by President von der Leyen's speech last week.
For further analysis, we're joined from Beirut by Professor of International Economics at the Lebanese University, Mr. Jassim Majaka. Welcome to Qnews Economic Bulletin. Mr. Jassim, how might the suspension of specific trade provisions impact Israel's overall export and import volumes with the EU?
Good evening. Thanks for having me. In fact, the suspension of the EU-Israeli Association Agreement, it's a major component, if you want, it's the major component of the proposed sanctions. This agreement grants preferential access to the Israeli goods entering to the European Union's market. And if there is a suspension of certain provisions, this in fact would likely result in the withdrawal of these trade preferences, which means leading to the imposition of tariffs or other duties on the Israeli products. This would make Israeli exports in the EU more expensive, of course, and less competitive for this. But let me, if you allow me, in fact, to tell you a little bit more about the import and the exports. The suspension, in fact, of the provisions of trade would probably, in fact, eliminate the special treatment for the Israeli goods to the EU markets. And this, in fact, will make Israeli export to the EU, let's say, hard or difficult, in fact, to enter as previously. Especially at the level of the machinery, the transports, the equipment and chemical. And of course, this will mean that the revenues coming from the export for Israel will fall. And this is something that the amplitude of this fall, in fact, will depend on the size of the suspension that the EU will take into account. In fact, if you allow me also, the size of the EU, it's a huge partner for the Israeli economy. It's something like around 32 of the global trade of Israel. But in the opposite side, you have 1%. So there is an imbalance of the agreement between or the trade between the EU and Israel. And this, in fact, is something very bad for Israel. But this is not the only thing, because you have also the financial leverage. We know that the EU, it's the largest investor in the Israel. And if also they add to its threats related to or sanctions related to the investment, in this case, in fact, they will lose billions and billions of euros in the Israeli economy.
Okay,
and this
so
will,
sir, which sectors of the Israeli economy are most vulnerable to the new EU sanctions, and why?
If you take before anything the import and the export, I told you that you have the machinery, you have the transports, the equipments, and chemical, because they are in fact so exported to EU. But if you consider also the financial sanctions related to the investment, in this case the whole economy, and more specifically the technological sector will be affected in a serious way, especially because in fact they after the October 7th in 2023, a lot of the investors, in fact, they went out from the Israeli economy by transferring their money, and this the central bank lacks of some foreign currencies. And now, if also we put sanctions related to the investments from the European Union, in this case, in fact, they will be affected also at the level of the reserves, foreign reserves, and this will also affect their ability to continue the war in Gaza, because as we know, as economists, we know already that any war is based mainly, or at least the base of any war is the reserves. So if we do not have foreign reserves, it means very simply that we cannot continue the war.
Very well. So could these sanctions lead to supply chain disruptions for Israeli businesses dependent on European markets or materials?
I think so. I think so, because if you want, sanctions will not be limited only to the import and export and the financial side, because you know that there will be some freeze for some individuals and for businessmen who are in fact involved in somehow in some violence against the Palestinians, but also the movement of these persons, any collaboration with European companies also may be affected. As I told you, it depends really, in fact, on the size or the amplitude of the sanctions that they will take. But if you allow me, any major sanction that the European Union will take, it needs, in fact, the majority of the 27 country member states of the European Union. And this is not so simple, in fact, to take, because we know already that Germany and Hungary, they are already, in fact, against such sanctions. And also the United States will play a certain role behind the scene, in fact, to convince some other countries also to not vote with such decision.
Yes.
But by itself, proposing such sanctions, it means very simply that there is a shift in the European position against Israel and its violence against Palestinians in Gaza.
Yes. And how might Israeli companies adapt their trade strategies in response to the limited access to EU agreements?
It will be so hard, because till now we know already that we are in war. Israel is in war, in fact, with the Palestinians in Gaza and also inside Israel, and there is a shortage already in labor for the Israeli companies. So really, we don't know exactly how they will do, but we think that the United States will not let Israel alone in this side, and will play a major role, in fact, to avoid such restrictions from the EU related to their supply chain, related to the sanctions or the financial sanctions, or even they may accept, in my opinion, they will work in diplomacy on this point exactly. They may work for putting sanctions on specific individuals or even ministers, and somehow, but for the companies it will be so hard, and I do believe that the US will help at this level.
Okay. Mr. Jassim, what are the potential short-term versus long-term economic consequences for Israel if these sanctions are actually enacted?
It's catastrophic for Israel, because you know already that the rating of Israel, of the economy of Israel, it's already, in fact, they downgraded Israel, and now additional sanctions, it means very simply additional downgrade, and this will make borrowing on the markets higher. Also relationship related to the trades between EU, between other countries like Canada, like Australia, like even UK, will be also hard. So I think at the short term and even at the mid-term, let's say, it will be so hard for Israel. But at the long term, we do not forget that Israel rely on its major ally, which is the United States, and it's a stronger ally. So that's why at the long term, I don't know, maybe there is some ambiguity related to the expectations, but at the short and the midterm, it's so bad for Israel if the EU adopts such sanctions.
And how could the sanctions, if adopted, affect foreign investment and investor confidence in Israel's economy?
As I said previously, in fact, you know, the EU is the major investor in Israel, in Israeli economy. So if they take measures related to this, they will lose billions and billions of dollars. I think easily we may reach 10 billions of euros losses in the Israeli economy. But there is, in fact, there are several levels of sanctions at the financial level. So they may, for example, forbid new investments, or they may require, in fact, the withdrawal of the investments. So it depends on the kind of the sanctions that they may take. But it will be so bad for them, and the consequences, it's immediate, because the rating agencies, like for example Moody's or Fitch or Standard & Poor's, they will downgrade immediately Israel after these sanctions, which means very simply that the cost of borrowing money on the financial markets will be higher, and this will penalize the Israeli economy and the companies. And it's so bad. I think that the main idea behind these sanctions and even the international action against Israel is just, in fact, to stop the violence against Palestinians in Gaza. It's not more than that. So this may lead also, they push the United States. I don't know, I'm not a political analyst to analyze such situation, but I think that this will push also the United States to accept at least the two-states solution. Maybe it's the best way, in fact, for the situation actually.
I understand. So in what ways could the Israeli government mitigate the economic fallout from the suspension of trade benefits with the EU?
It's by opening, in fact, more channels with the US, with other countries that they support her. Many other countries. They may also take at the internal level some actions, for example, like the related to the taxes. Many actions, in fact, could be taken to, let's say, not of having such impact, I mean, or a huge impact on the on the economy, on the Israeli economy, on the companies also. I remind you that already the companies inside Israel, they are suffering a lot from shortage of labor, but also from the global context of war. We do not have additional investments. We know that Israel is attractive related to the technology, the high technology. But since the beginning of the war in October 2023, we have no more, in fact, investment, and the whole situation, in fact, makes the companies, firms in Israel in very bad situation. I don't think that they can continue like this for a long term, and I hope that at least such a proposal from the EU will make an effect at the political level in Israel.
Okay. From Beirut, that was Professor of International Economics at the Lebanese University, Mr. Jassim Majaka. Thank you so much for your valuable insights. Back again to our news, and still in Europe, Zoo Research Institute has reported that German investor expectations rose unexpectedly in September, in a sign of cautious optimism despite the economy's poor performance compared to other group of 7 or G7 nations. The Zoo's Economic Sentiment Index rose to 37.3 points from 34.7 points in August. However, the index assessing the current economic situation darkened, dropping 1.4 points more than expected to minus 76.4 in September from minus 68.6 the month before. Economy Minister Carlos Cuerpo has stated that Spain raised the 2025 economic growth forecast to 2.7% from 2.6%. He also expected gross domestic product to expand by 0.7% in the third quarter from the previous quarter. Cuerpo noted that Spain will be the fastest growing advanced economy and that the country has a positive outlook until 2028. Still in Europe, figures from the Office for National Statistics have shown that Britain's job market is losing momentum as the number of people on company payrolls has fallen for the 7th consecutive month and wage growth has slowed. However, there are also hints that employers might be ready to start hiring again. The number of job vacancies increased for the very first time since early last year, rising to 728,000 in the 3 months to August. Basic wage growth in the private sector, which the Bank of England watches closely, slowed to 4.7% from 4.8%. The overall weekly earnings, excluding bonuses, grew by 4.8%, a drop from the previous 5.0%, but still above the 3% level that's considered consistent with the central bank's 2% inflation target. Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko has announced that Ukraine's government has prepared a draft 2026 budget aiming for a deficit of 18.4% of gross domestic product and allocating more funds for its defense efforts. The 2026 budget draft envisages 2.8 trillion hryvnias in revenues and about 4.8 trillion hryvnias in expenditures. She noted plans to increase its budget revenues by about 447 billion hryvnias next year, but did not specify any measures. In Asia, India's Commerce Ministry data has shown that merchandise trade deficit narrowed in August to $26.49 billion from $27.35 billion in July, as exports slowed after U.S. President Donald Trump hiked import tariffs on Indian goods. The total goods exports fell to $35.10 billion in August from $37.24 billion in July. Exports to the U.S. fell to $6.86 billion from $8.01 billion in July. Moreover, the total imports declined to $61.59 billion from $64.59 billion. The government estimated services exports in August at $34.06 billion and imports at $17.45 billion, suggesting a total goods and services trade deficit at $9.88 billion. In North America, Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation has reported that housing starts fell 16% in August compared with the previous month, a steeper decline than expected. The data showed that the seasonally adjusted annualized rate of housing starts was 245,791 units, down from a revised 293,537 units in July. In Latin America, Brazilian Finance Minister Fernando Haddad has expected interest rate cuts to begin in the coming months, citing a more favorable foreign exchange outlook in Latin America's largest economy. Haddad added that President Lula da Silva will conclude his four-year term in 2026 with the lowest accumulated inflation ever recorded, projected for the first time to come in below 20%. He noted that the average economic growth during Lula's term will be close to 3% per year, with unemployment at historic lows. Haddad argued that these factors put Brazil in a stronger fiscal position than the one inherited from the previous government.
Tanto dos Estados Unidos quanto do Brasil estão recorrendo para salvaguardar os seus interesses e os contratos que foram estabelecidos, e sim buscar os canais diplomáticos competentes para atenuar o efeito da decisão sobre a economia brasileira.
In Oceania, Reserve Bank of Australia Assistant Governor Sarah Hunter has stated that the economic outlook is balanced at the moment, with risks on both the upside and downside, while there are signs consumer spending is picking up. She noted that core inflation was coming in broadly in line with the forecasts, though there seemed to be less disinflation in prices. Hunter added that underlying inflation was getting closer to the midpoint of the RBA's 2% to 3% target band, and aim was to keep the economy near to full employment as possible. The U.S. Senate has narrowly confirmed Stephen Miran to the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors, giving President Trump more influence over the central bank. The 48-47 largely party-line vote gives one of Trump's top economic advisors an interest rate-setting vote on the eve of a key policy meeting. Miran's confirmation follows the unexpected August resignation of Adrian Kugler, which created an opening for Trump to appoint someone more supportive of his calls for lower interest rates.
I will act independently, as the Federal Reserve always does, based on my own personal analysis of economic data, my own personal analysis of the effects of economic policies upon the economy.
Separately, a U.S. appeals court ruled that Lisa Cook can remain a Federal Reserve governor, rebuffing President Donald Trump's efforts to remove her just ahead of a key vote on interest rates. The Trump administration is expected to quickly turn the Supreme Court in a last-ditch bid to unseat Cook. The Federal Reserve has revealed that U.S. banks borrowed $1.5 billion from the Federal Reserve Standing Repo Facility, or the SRF. The borrowing coincided with quarterly corporate tax payments and the settlement of $78 billion in Treasury payments. Following these payments, the Treasury's cash balance is expected to exceed $870 billion. The SRF provides oversight cash in exchange for treasuries and other collateral, serving as a backstop against potential funding shortfalls. The International Energy Agency has warned that the decline in output from mature oil and gas fields is accelerating, requiring companies to increase investment just to maintain current production levels. According to the IEA report, a lack of continued investment would cause the world to lose the equivalent of Brazil and Norway's combined oil production each year. It noted that conventional oil fields are seeing an average annual decline of 5.6%, while gas fields are declining at 6.8%. The IEA stated that a halt in new investment would cut oil supply by 5.5 million barrels per day. This figure is roughly equal to the total oil output of Brazil and Norway. Similarly, the decline for natural gas has risen to 270 billion cubic meters per year, up from 180 per year. Germany's National Operators Group, known as Qnews, has announced that the country's natural gas storage facilities are already at 75% capacity, putting them on track to meet the European Union's requirement of 81% by November the 1st. While this level is expected to ensure a secure winter supply under normal temperatures, the Qnews noted that it will continue to monitor the situation closely as risks remain, particularly in the event of a cold winter. Oil prices rose on Tuesday as markets weighed a potential disruption of supplies from Russia due to Ukrainian drone attacks on its ports and refineries, as well as the prospect of a U.S. central bank interest rate cut. Brent crude futures were up 67 cents or 1% to $68.11 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude was at $64.12, up 82 cents or 1.3%. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has announced that the U.S. and China agreed on a framework to transfer TikTok to U.S. ownership. The agreement is expected to be confirmed in a Friday call between President Trump and President Xi Jinping.
Getting to this framework was made possible by President Trump and the high regard that President Trump has for Party Chair Xi. So when the leaders have mutual respect, then the delegations have mutual respect. And as Ambassador Greer said, we were in substantial contact with President Trump last night and then again today. We had very good discussions. We preferred to keep the discussions on TikTok. We will be holding trade negotiations in about a month again at a different location. But we talked about many things that we might do in the future. We're not going to talk about the commercial terms of the deal. It's between two private parties, but the commercial terms have been agreed upon.
For his part, China's top trade negotiator Li Qinggang stated that they had fully utilized the China-U.S. economic and trade consultation mechanism and that they had engaged in constructive exchanges on issues of common concern, including TikTok. He noted that China consistently opposed the politicization and weaponization of scientific, technological, and economic and trade issues. Chen Gang added that China would never seek to reach any agreement at the expense of its principled stance, corporate interests, and international fairness and justice. He further called the U.S. ban on advanced technology and other Chinese products unilateral bullying. And that brings us to the end of our economic bulletin. Here is what we have been covering. Eurozone industrial output rises by 0.3%. EU Commission will vote to impose new sanctions on Israel. And IEA warns against decline in output from mature oil and gas. And this concludes our economic bulletin. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to always stay informed. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Qnews.